Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Stealth Hitch Rack Receiver on a 2018 Audi Q5. Now this is what your hitch is going to look like when it's installed, and you're probably wondering, well, where is it? And that's why it has the name Stealth Hitch, because it's going to keep your Audi looking nice and clean and OEM and still have that nice luxury appearance until you need to use your 2-inch rack receiver. And that way, when you want to load up your cargo carriers or bike racks, you can just pop that into place and you're ready to go. Now this can only be used with bike racks and cargo carriers or other suspended accessories. This is not meant for a ball mount or towing, and if you are planning on towing a trailer, I highly recommend picking up the towing kit, as it'll come with a 7-pole and 4-pole. Now our 2-inch receiver tube opening is going to be great again for a bunch of different bike racks or cargo carriers. It's a pretty standard size, and this one has a tongue weight rating of 600 pounds, so that means you can load up a 4-bike rack with a bunch of bikes or a cargo carrier, and it's going to work great for that. But all of them are going to stay in place with a 5/8 pin and clip, which is not included with this, so you are going to want to pick one of those up. Now, what I really like about this is you can lock this in place. There is a spot for your key to turn that tumbler, and no one's going to be able to walk away with this, so that's pretty cool. And when you are ready to take it off, you can simply turn that key, twist this knob, and it pops out, giving you a nice, clean OEM look. Now this does stick out pretty far when it's in place, but that's fine, because if you're using this, that probably means you have accessories loaded in place. So as far as aesthetics wise, it's actually not a bad thing, because you can stow any folding accessories. They're not going to make contact with your fascia, which is really nice. And as far as ground clearance goes, so from the top of the receiver tube opening to the ground, you're looking at about 14.5 inches, so that's pretty good. I don't really worry too much that any of your accessories will make contact on flat driving, but as you go up an incline, they're going to want to tilt towards the ground, so just kind of keep that in mind. Now, as far as the installation goes, this is a fairly tricky one, because you have to pull off the rear fascia. The hitch is going to mount up against or behind the bumper beam, so that does require taking off all of your rear fascia. And the problem with that is this car does not allow you to unplug the fascia, so you really are kind of left having it hanging off to the side while doing it. But once you have it off, it's not too bad. There are a few different spots in the interior that you're going to have to pull out to gain access to the bumper that's mounted up. So I kind of recommend, if you are not a very handy person, this might not be the one for you, or find someone that's a fairly handy person and ask them kindly to help you out with this. And I'm going to walk you through all the steps. I have some tips and tricks along the way that's going to help you get it installed. So let's take a look at that. Beginner installation, we're going to head over to each side of our rear fascia with our hatch open. We're going to have a T20 Torx bit. We're going to go ahead and remove each of these little plugs here. Now during this whole process, I recommend having a nice organized spot to keep all your hardware. It's going to make reinstallation a lot easier. So with this out, we'll go ahead and get the other side as well. Now on our wheel well liner, we're going to go all the way to the bottom here, and there's a T25 screw. We're going to go ahead and remove that, and that's going to allow us to peel back our fender liner, it's a flexible material, and there's going to be more screws located behind that. But to get to those, this will have to come off first. And it's pretty tight here, so I would recommend having a small ratchet with a Torx bit that you can put on there. As far as a driver or something, it might be a little bit tricky to get in there. So with that removed, we can't pull out too much. There is a plastic nut that's up here. If you need to, you could remove that. It looks like a 10 millimeter, but we should be able to peel this back. And if you need to, a trim panel tool, sometimes a plastic one, you can run this along and kind of peel that back. But with a little bit of prying, we can work this out. And there should be 3 screws that we're going to remove. So we'll just kind of follow up here, and you're going to find them located along this. There's one here, and just run your fingers. There's another here, and there's also one that's going to be tucked up. Should be up in this area. So as you kind of work your way up, go ahead and you can start taking those out. They should be a T25 as well. Now, there's going to be more hardware located up on the fender liner here, or actually the wheel well liner, but we need to pop this portion off. And before we do that, I looked under here, and it looks like we also have it might be a T20 on this one. I didn't see it in the instruction manual, so if you have this screw, I'll go ahead and swap this over to a T20. We'll get that taken out, and that's going to allow us to peel this up. So with that T20 screw, looks like this, removed, we can go ahead and start peeling back this trim. Now, be careful. Don't pull too hard, because if you pull it too hard, it may stress out the plastic, and you're going to have creases on here that unfortunately probably won't come out. So just take your time. You can use a plastic trim panel tool to kind of run it along here, but honestly by hand you can kind of just find the gap, use your fingers to kind of just pry this back. Now once you kind of get to about this point, you're going to see that we have another Torx screw here. But what we want to do to kind of prevent any damage from occurring, I'm going to put painter's tape along this whole edge as well as here, and that way, as this kind of could potentially flap as we pull the fascia off, it's going to prevent any scratches from occurring or potentially happening on our clear coat. So whole goal is to get our hitch installed without damaging our vehicle, and this is a nice easy way to do that. Now again, you want to make sure you have access to this, so you'll have to hold it out a little bit, even with a smaller tool like this. If you need to, you can put some folded up paper towels or a rag kind of in here to kind of create a nice soft gap. But again, don't pull too hard on this. You don't want to damage this. So we'll go ahead and get this removed. And then at this point, we're just going to repeat all those same steps on the other side of the vehicle. So go ahead and get that knocked out. So now underneath our rear fascia, we're going to find 4 T25 Torx bits that are just kind of attaching to some, we have some heat shield here. It looks like it's also part of a bracket that goes further up, but we'll go ahead and get these removed as well. So now inside, we're going to remove our cargo covers, and there's just a quarter turn twist knob here. So if you just twist that counterclockwise, we'll see that we have our panel. Now, don't pull too hard, because we have our 12-volt outlet that's kind of tucked down here. We're going to want to separate that, and we're just going to be pushing up. There should be just a locking tab here. It's kind of in this half moon shape, so you can kind of just pry on that, and we should be able to get this to separate. Here we go. And we can put our panel aside for now. So we'll go ahead and repeat that same process on the driver's side. This one doesn't have any attachments, at least on this model, so we'll set this aside as well. We'll go ahead and get our cargo tray taken out here. And we're also going to remove this whole section. We are going to be tying into our battery later on for wiring. So we have this whole section should come out fairly easily, but we do have to get our spare out. Now, this is, I believe, a factory sub. So in order to get that to where it's not hooked up, we're going to want to pry back on this red tab. That's our locking tab, and just push on this, and that should separate it pretty easily. And then we'll just twist this until it's loose. You can probably just remove this. Now eventually we'll be taking out this whole section, but we need to remove our threshold that we have here in order for that foam piece to kind of get past it. So there's a nice little gap that's kind of tucked here. You can kind of get your finger underneath it. It is going to be a little bit tricky. There are a little bit of gaps to where you can kind of pry on it. I'll be using a plastic trim tool here. We're going to be pulling up, and that should separate the clips. So I'm going to just kind of pry up. And once you kind of get it popped, it should be pretty easy to start on the other side, and the rest of it should come out pretty simply. And then we'll just set this aside. We'll go ahead and get our air compressor and our jack taken out, and you can see these are just a cinch strap. So if you just kind of peel that back, that should allow us to get these taken out. And we're going to be removing these sections here. Again, this kind of holds part of this in. So to get these to pry up, you should be able to kind of just pry them with a screwdriver on the plastic portion. So just put the car gauge or the tow hook there kind of up. And that's going to reveal it looks like a T40. Let's check that. It is a T40. There's going to be 4 of them. So one here, and then 2 on the other side. So once you get these pried up, we'll go ahead and start removing this hardware. So now with those Torx screws taken out, we should be able to get these pulled out pretty easily. You can see this portion kind of keeps that in place. So you need to just pull straight up. And with these out, we should be able to get this center portion taken out. Now the center insert kind of keeps this taut against each side, so go ahead and remove that if you haven't, and that's going to allow us to kind of draw this in a little bit. Now you do have some clips that you kind of have to keep an eye on, and it's fairly tight here, but if we can get one side to pop out like this, then we should be able to get this other side out fairly easy. So now we're going to find that we have quite a few grommets in the back here. We're going to be focusing on the larger one that doesn't have the kind of button in the center. So you can normally get these with your fingernail, but if you need to, a flathead screwdriver will also work. And if you feel back there, there's going to be a large stud with a 10mm nut on there. So you need a deep well to be able to slide over that. If you have a nut driver, that's a great option. Now be careful with these. It's a very small nut that you can drop pretty easily. So what I normally do is loosen it up quite a bit to where I can get this by hand. And if you can get a magnet to kind of finish that off, that's going to be kind of the best method so you don't drop it. But also, once we pull the fascia off, we should be able to find it as well. So we have one here. There's also going to be one here, and then there's 2 of them that are going to be located kind of wider. So past this interior part, it's actually open. You should be able to feel the stud there, and there's one on this side as well. If you can't find it, just peel back some of this sound deadening, and that should be located right there. So we'll go ahead and start to get these taken off. And if it's hard to line it up, you can actually kind of use one of the holes where the center threshold was to, if you shine a flashlight in there, you can kind of get a straight shot on it. So go ahead and get those 4 10mm nuts taken off. So once you loosen it, there is a portion on that stud that it can kind of just hang there, not on threads. And once you're kind of at that point, it's probably best, and what I found is to use a magnet. And you just kind of run this on there, and then we should be able to draw that off fairly easily. That way we don't drop it. So you can do that for all of them. So again, go ahead, make sure you don't drop these. It's just going to make it a little bit easier getting everything back together. Now we're getting ready to get our fascia taken off, and so just as we did with this wheel well trim, I went ahead and put a line of painter's tape on the rear quarter as well as the rear fascia, again, just for that added protection. Now, I do recommend having an extra set of hands, and we're actually going to start on each side, kind of prying back, but this fascia, you cannot completely remove it. You don't want to separate the electrical connections. You'll see that pretty clear in the instructions, but that means you need to have something set up. Generally, you'll have to pry it back towards the driver's side, and the wires generally aren't that long, so you don't have a whole lot of room to play with. So make sure you have something to set your fascia on so it doesn't get scratched. Maybe, I have a cart here that's meant for it, but you are going to want to make sure that you have a nice, safe place to put it, and it can get a little bit tricky, so I'll show you that as we go along. So just kind of pull, you can put your hand kind of behind the fascia. Now there's going to be some plastic clips along here that they should come out fairly easily. If you need to, plastic trim tool, you can kind of just push down on those tabs and that should help release it. But again, just kind of work your way back. And then there's also going to be clips along here, but as we kind of pop this out, we should be able to get that removed. So this white plastic clip stayed in. We'll pry that off later and put it back on the fascia. Let's get this peeled back a little bit more. And there we go. So there's some foam that kind of insulates around there, and you can see those studs that we took those nuts off previous. So it'll slide out. At this point, you can see that our wiring harness is attached over here. We might be able to pry off some of those to give us a little bit more room to work, but we are going to be kind of limited here. So I have help. He's holding my fascia. we're going to go ahead and get these wires separated to make it a little bit easier. We're not unplugging, but we have these plastic clips, and if we draw this back, that should help us a little bit. So looks like our wire's just on a plastic clip on a stud here. So this one's kind of holding this back a little. We might be able to get this one taken off as well. And again, just trying to give us as much room as we possibly can, because it's pretty tight here. Looks like we have this sensor mounted up, and this is kind of holding our wire back. So I'm going to go ahead with my 10 millimeter, take this off. We're going to keep it plugged in, but at least we can move that. So with those 10 millimeters taken off our bracket, this is going to make it a lot easier to get our fascia out of the way. I'll just kind of set this in here for now. So we are limited here. Obviously, there's a grommet there that can pull out. So we need to find a nice safe place to set this. Really all we need to do is get to this bumper beam. So as long as it's out of the way to where you can get to that hardware, that's kind of what we're looking for. Now at this point, we are ready to get our bumper impact beam taken off. Now there's also a bracket that goes along with this, and it's all attached with 4 bolts on each side. Now these are going to be a 16 millimeter. The bottom ones, you actually have an access hole through the impact bar to get to those. Now through this, we're not going to be reusing these bolts or have this brace back, but we are going to be putting the impact bar up. So you can set the bolts and the brace aside when you're done, but keep the impact bar handy because we're going to get ready to put the hitch up immediately after. So what I recommend too is you can take them out, but before you take off both sides, have one of them. I'm just going to put a few threads in here, and that's just going to keep the bumper impact bar from dropping out. Sometimes there are some clips that hold it up. Now at this point, we can go ahead and grab our hitch and we can get this in place. Now I'm also going to have all of my hardware that's included in the kit. It should be these bolts. We'll put a split washer and a flat washer. So you might want to get those prepped ready to go. And this will slide. There is a stud here that's going to kind of hold this in place, but you will have to kind of just keep this in place because we're also going to put the bumper beam back on top of it. So that's where it's handy to have that hardware, because you can, once you get this in place, you can get one started on each side, and it's going to hold it up for you. You might need an extra set of hands here, but if I can get this in place, we'll be good to go. Now you might need to move the hitch a little side to side to get the holes to align, but once we get one started on each, it's going to make it a lot easier. So just go through and get the rest of the hardware started, and then we're going to be tightening it up. Make sure that you have the bumper beam as well as the hitch aligned nice and centered up, because once you tighten it down, that's kind of where it's going to live. So getting it centered up right out the gate is going to be the best option. And to tighten these down, these are going to be a 17 millimeter socket, and we'll be coming back with a torque wrench pretty shortly to make sure they're at the proper torque setting, which is not actually that high. So if you're tightening it down, I wouldn't use a heavy impact. I'm going to be using an electric ratchet, but honestly just a regular ratchet should be enough torque by hand to get us pretty close. So now we're going to come back with our torque wrench, and the torque settings are going to be found in the instruction manual. So dial in your torque wrench and we'll torque all these down. Now, if you need a torque wrench, we have these available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free, but this will make sure that it's going to be tight enough to stay in place for the lifespan of the hitch, and also it's not going to be too tight, putting stress on those weld nuts. Now at this point, we're going to get our receiver block put in place, and depending on whether you have just the normal rack receiver or if you have the towing kit, it is going to change a little bit differently here, but up until now everything's installed the same. So if you have the towing kit, that's the way we're going to install ours. So we have our safety chain loops. These are going to go around the actual brackets on the hitch, so our block will slide up, and then we'll have these sandwiched on the outside. We also have our Z bracket, and the Z bracket is going to be the way that we attach our wiring. So we'll get that in place too. So the hardware you're going to be using are going to be large bolts attached to it, and also you have this rubber cap on the bottom. If you want, you can take that out. You're going to have your keys in there, so keep those handy. And also in the instruction manual, there's a sheet that you can write down the 5-digit code that's on that key for safekeeping if you ever need to replace it. So make sure you do that. But I'll go ahead, I'll get this put into place, and then we'll go from there. So your safety chain loops, the brackets that go on the outside of this, you might have to feed that over the locking handle, but you'll see we have one here, and they should be facing back, so your safety chain loops will sit actually towards the front of the vehicle, and then make sure you have your Z-bracket set up with the slotted portion facing down. So you can see I have this all in place. So now we're going to go ahead and get this tightened down. It's going to be a 15/16 socket, and you also need a wrench to hold that in place while we tighten it down. So now, torquing it down to the settings that are found in the instruction manual. This is a pretty high torque setting, so if you are picking up a torque wrench for the rest of the hardware, I recommend getting a 1/2-inch one. That way you can cover this torque span. Your 3/8 ones generally won't reach that. Make sure you have your wrench on the back side. And something else, if you're following along with this and you are going step by step, this is obviously how the instructions say to do it, but I kind of recommend you could probably do this off the vehicle beforehand, and that might be a little bit easier as far as getting tools in here. So that's just a little helpful tip if you haven't done this step so far. Now, we are installing the towing kit on this one, so that includes the 7-pole and the wiring that goes along with that. But if you are just doing the rack receiver kit on your Audi, at this point you are ready to start putting everything back in reverse order. Now, I will recommend getting your bracket put back in place that we had that sensor on, and just make sure that you follow those instructions in reverse order to get everything put back in. And that was a look and installation of the Stealth Hitch Rack Receiver on a 2018 Audi Q5.